Welcome back to those people I've already spoken to, and welcome to those people who've just joined us. This is a webinar hosted by Radius Systems, and we're talking on the topic of net zero by 2050. And we're taking very much of a practical guidance standpoint. We've got a fantastic line of speakers coming up shortly to share their perspectives, what they're doing in their organisations, legislation. So let's get going. My name is Dion Knowles and I'm the head of marketing at Radius Systems. Today I'm joined by a panel of speakers, and if you aren't already aware who these are, we've got Horace from Cadent Gas, and he'll be talking about how they're reducing their emissions and what their plans are over the next 8 years. We've got Jeremy Heath, who is the Innovation Manager at SES Water, and he will be delving into the collaborative strategies for the water industry around leakage reduction and how that knocks on to net zero. We've also got Phil Richards. Phil is from Sustainable Energy First. They're an energy consultancy company, and he'll be starting us off by setting the scene and outlining those regulatory frameworks that we're all going to need to be complying with. And finally, rounding it off, we've got Simon Jones, who's the Sustainability Manager at Radius Systems, and he'll be exploring bioethylene pipes, whether that's sugarcane, whatever bioform it is, the chemistry of it, and looking at the different viability possibilities of it as well. As I mentioned earlier, at the end, we'll be running a questions and answer session. Do feel free to put your questions in the chat box below. I think Paul, I think you're having problems with sound. I think I'm quite reassured to hear that other people are okay with that. Paul, I'd maybe have a look at your mics, your speaker settings. But thanks for checking that in with us. Right, so let's talk about this now. We know the bad press about nations around the world are falling short in their commitments to meet the goals. And we need to ensure that as an industry, we don't fall into the same trap, whether it's the environmental aspect, the knock-on economic and business impact if we don't. So let's get started. I would like to introduce Phil. Thanks for being here with us today.
Hi, Dion. Morning, everyone, or afternoon. Thanks for having me on the webinar this afternoon. Yeah, so as Dion said, I'm Phil Richards. I'm the head of ESG here at Sustainable Energy First. Sustainable Energy First is a consultancy, as Dion said earlier. We're around 150 staff. About 25 years we've been in operation. We had a significant rebrand over the last couple of years where we were known as BIU, so British Independent Utilities, and we obviously were looking at where the markets are heading to and where our customers are needing more support. So took the decision to become Sustainable Energy First. So our business operation, as I said earlier, is to support with consultancy, so looking at the sort of wider spectrum in terms of energy procurement arrangements, looking at the management of administration for utilities as well, support with infrastructure, so whether it be meter connections, and then moving more into sort of the management and control in terms of sustainability, so looking at net zero strategies, energy reduction, and also wider sort of compliance or voluntary supports that clients need in terms of different compliance, which I'll go into in a bit more detail. So just moving on to the next slide. Thanks, Dion. So as Dion was saying earlier, so the webinar today, we're obviously going to look through different sort of areas in terms of UK's commitment to net zero. So just sort of covering that in a bit more holistic approach. So the UK has signed up to net zero, which is effectively for us to reduce our carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions associated with pre-industrial levels, so back to before 1990 levels. Effectively, businesses and different non-businesses and sectors themselves are finding different pressures in terms of achieving net zero, whether it come from the government themselves. So effectively, the government is obviously committed to net zero, so that encapsulates everyone, so every sector and every individual effectively to support with net zero. Although there's no specific net zero compliance requirement for businesses to achieve net zero. There are obviously other compliances that require more disclosures or reporting or effectively demonstration of aligning with net zero. Customers, suppliers, businesses, and not NGOs as well, are all finding the pressures, as I mentioned earlier, and that will come from all different ranges. So you'll see it from the investors, the customers demanding more, even employees now. We're seeing that taking on new talent are requiring our credentials in terms of what we're doing as a business in terms of supporting with reduction in net zero and wider ESG. Just covering on ESG, we're going to focus more on net zero today, but ESG is effectively looking at environmental, social, and governance, and effectively net zero feeds into the environmental elements of ESG. But keeping it for net zero today, again, businesses are needing to demonstrate how they're performing against net zero. So just moving on to the next slide, please, Dion. Thank you. So net zero in a holistic sort of view is and broken down into sort of the three categories or three scopes, should I say, is looking at three scopes of GHG emissions. So scope one is looking at direct emissions resulting from businesses emitting emissions from either fossil fuels or fugitive gases into the atmosphere. So that's either through gas being provided to site and then through boilers, or vehicles as part of the fleet using fossil fuels like petrol or diesel. Scope two is effectively indirect. So if you're being provided with electricity or heat, steam, whatever it may be, but through a form of production of energy from off-sites being provided to your premises. And then scope three is looking at the real sort of tip of the iceberg. So it's looking at the indirect emissions from upstream and downstream operations. So that in sort of collective approach would be a business's GHG inventory once captured, and once that's been assessed, that's effectively what a business or any sort of sector needs to look at in terms of making reductions. So going back in terms of the UK and what the UK is committed to, as I said earlier, is by 2050 the UK needs to align its greenhouse gas emissions in line with the Paris Agreement, which is effectively stating that we will reduce them in line with 1990 pre-industrial levels. The reason for this is because scientific papers have been undertaken. So take this sort of back to sort of around 2015 when the Paris Agreement was undertaken, which was effectively part of the United Nations consultation associated with the UN conference for COP21. And ultimately what that did was it had a special paper written which looked scientifically in terms of the alignment in terms of carbon emissions being released into the air or greenhouse gas emission being released into the air and the impacts associated with global warming. And that's effectively what we're all needing to do, is to look at the reduction of carbon emissions, global greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce the global temperatures. So effectively, we're looking to get back to 1.5 degrees, and that's what the UK is committed to. There are other countries as well, but speaking specifically for the UK today, we're looking to reduce those emissions by 2050. Otherwise, as the science has sort of demonstrated, if we don't reduce those emissions, we move into areas of tipping points, which are effectively scenarios where we won't be able to eradicate them. So rising temperatures, sea levels, and so forth. So yeah, just that's given sort of a bit of background. In terms of net zero, I'll just move on to the next slide, please, Dion. In terms of net zero and what SE First has been doing, so I wear two hats here at Sustainable Energy First. So as the head of ESG, I'm looking at our own businesses remit in terms of net zero and how we're looking to achieve reductions for our own emissions. But then what I also do is also to keep abreast in terms of our customers as well, so different sectors, in terms of looking at how to support them in terms of achieving net zero. So we've defined effectively an approach to support businesses by looking at staged approaches. So sort of touched on earlier, to look at the greenhouse gas emissions associated to the inventory of the business or company or sector, whatever it may be, and then looking at sort of strategizing in terms of how to make those reductions, whether it be from funding, efficiencies, or reductions on site, and then also more sort of leading into those stubborn emissions that can't be removed, whether they're offset or if there may be opportunities for looking at insetting as well, but also demonstrating all of the work that's been undertaken on an ongoing basis and reporting progress towards net zero. So that's effectively what we've been doing at SE First. I'll just move on to the next slide, please, Dion. Oh, sorry. So yeah, so in summary, so as I said earlier, so that's effectively what Sustainable Energy First has been doing. As I said earlier, we've worked our strategy in line with other compliance requirements. Again, perhaps if there's any questions at the end, I'd be happy to talk those through in terms of how net zero feeds into wider ESGs. As I said earlier, there's more compliance sort of elements and areas. I just wanted to sort of summarise in terms of the UK and our progress towards net zero. There's obviously been a committee that's been formed as part of the UK's ambitions towards net zero. So that's the Department of Energy Securities and Net Zero, which is effectively looking to strategize in terms of how the UK makes reductions in line with the different sectors and industry. If we're just focusing on the UK for today, there's obviously been significant progress in terms of utilities for carbon emission reductions, given that we've obviously moved away from phasing out coal. So there's been significant reductions in terms of fossil fuels being used. There's also been more renewable generation being brought online. There's more incentives as well and more guidance associated with renewable energies being implemented within the grid, which my colleagues will touch on more as we go through the presentation today. But just touching on the backlash in terms of so sort of the latest updates from government, there's been some pushback, I think, from original commitments, as most of you will have seen in the media. So in terms of focusing on particular areas, I suppose the domestic stock, so looking at houses, I think we've got some of the worst performing properties in the world, as it were, in terms of energy reduction and efficiency. And I think effectively we're trying to look at more decarbonisation through air source heat pumps, but there's been pushback in terms of the rollout of air source heat pumps from gas boilers, and also in terms of the phasing out of fossil fuels in terms of electric vehicles as well. So yeah, that's just my sort of summary for today, but I'll now pass on to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Phil. Now we're going to move on to Horace Wheeler from Cadent Gas. We all know who Cadent are, but you might not know what their ambitious plans are. Horace is going to share those with us now. Thank you, Horace. Over to you.
Good afternoon, and excuse me. Thank you very much, Dion. So we'll dive straight into the slides, if that's okay. So if you can spin on, Dion. I will just give you a little bit of information about Cadent as a business. So on the map here, you can see the footprint of our networks, and Cadent is the largest of the gas distribution network businesses in the UK. And so again, you can sort of see our geographic footprint here covers from the northwest of England all the way down to North London. And we supply about 30% of all the energy consumed in UK homes and businesses, distributing that through 135,000 kilometres of pipe to 11 million homes and businesses, and 40,000 industrial customers who are dotted all across our network. So Phil's done a fantastic job there of setting out the importance to the UK of our net zero goals, and I'll talk a little bit more about the role that Cadent are playing in the energy transition. So what are we looking to achieve over the next decade? Well, we're very much looking to transform our business over the next decade. So as a regulated network business, we operate according to 5-year regulatory periods, and the current one we're in is RIIO-2. That comes to an end at the start of 26, and we then have 5 years between then and 2031. And of course, the energy system is going to change pretty radically over that period. And so we are also, our strategy is also to transform our operations fairly radically alongside supporting our customers through the energy transition. And broadly, we're doing that in 3 different ways. So we always focused on managing our costs and trying to be as cost efficient as possible. And digitalization is increasingly a key opportunity for us in terms of unlocking the potential within our business and simplifying and making our processes much more efficient. Now, the second plank is reducing both the carbon emissions of our customers, but also the carbon emissions of Cadent itself as a business. And a key part of that is the Iron Mains Risk Reduction Programme. This started in 2002 and is very much a safety-led programme that runs out until 2032, replacing the oldest and leakiest iron mains on our network with plastic pipe like the guys at Radius are producing, which has some very significant benefits, not least of which is the leak reduction that we can achieve with that replacement. And once we complete that program by 2032, the difference that will make will be 750,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions across our network. So a really substantial change being driven by that program. Now, leakage more broadly makes up about 90% of the emissions from the Cadent business. And so back on digitalization, there's a key program there around digital leak prevention and detection. And I'll chuck a couple of links in the chat when I finish presenting. And anybody who's interested, please do have a look at some of the work going on in Cadent to look more broadly at leakage. Another angle in terms of carbon emissions is connecting biomethane. Biomethane is chemically the same as natural gas, but is produced from organic materials. And so overall, the carbon footprint is about 20% of natural gas. So at the moment, we're supplying about 1 to 2% of the gas that we supply in our network is injected biomethane. Now, according to the UK government and the Climate Change Committee, we could have potential substantially greater, up to about 10 times that. So there's a lot more potential for decarbonising the gas that runs through our pipes. And of course, the future of gas could well be could be about hydrogen. And so we're doing a huge amount of work about the future of hydrogen, including how hydrogen could be blended into our existing network to decarbonise a proportion of the gas that we supply. So in order to achieve all of that, we need to secure the skills of great people. And a key part of that will always be ensuring that our safety record is maintained through effective training and training the right mindset and capabilities of our people. But going forward, we do want and need to be more proactive, collecting and leveraging more data, and therefore building out the skills and capabilities that we have as a business in order to embrace that much more digitalized future. So if we can spin on to the last slide, Dion. So where will we be by 2032 in terms of carbon emissions? So emissions from UK homes were about 50 million tonnes in 2022 in the UK. Cadent emissions only include the emissions from our operational business, so it doesn't include any of the emissions that come from our customers. And on this chart, you can see that our emissions in 21-22 were about 1.25 million tonnes a year, so 1,250 kilotons a year. And that first blue bar, you can see the impact that the Iron Mains risk reduction replacement program will have in dramatically reducing those emissions over the next decade. And then the next chunk is that block of around digitalization that we've talked to. And then other improvements across our business will drive that overall 66% reduction from where we are today to where we want to be by the end of our RIIO-3 period in 2032. So we're making our network more efficient and less carbon intensive, as well as developing our business to offer flexibility for our customers and options about how they decarbonize their homes and businesses. And I'll hand back to Dion.
Fantastic. Excuse me. Thanks. Really appreciate seeing how you as an industry leader are really stepping up on this issue. Now, moving on, we are moving over to water. So we've had the gas perspective. We've got Jeremy Heath. Jeremy is the Innovation Manager at SES Water. He's going to be talking about collaboration on leakage and how that connects to net zero. Jeremy, or Jez, as he also likes to be known. Over to you.
Thanks, Dion. Can you just confirm everybody can hear me okay? Fantastic, good. Okay, well, look, let's start off by talking about net zero in the water industry as a broader piece first. So there's a number of things going on here. Obviously, we've got this, drive to be net zero by 2050, but in fact, within the water companies, there's an additional measure as well. So we have what's called the public interest commitment. So this was the English water companies and effectively said, look, we really need to be driving into net zero. And effectively we said, look, we really want to get to net zero on our operational emissions by 2030. So the English water companies have been driving towards that. But you know what? It's really hard to do. It's not going to be an easy target for us to hit, even with that one. And a number of challenges, and particularly when we look at things like treatment and moving water around. Okay, so for us, SES Water, small water company just south of London, we soften our water. That softening process is very carbon intensive. Okay, uses a lot of chemicals to do that, and in fact, by 2030, that's going to account for about 60% of our operational emissions. So anything that we can do to reduce the amount of water we're treating and the amount of water that we're having to move around is going to make huge benefits in terms of our net zero. Okay, so that kind of frames the whole bit of why I'm going to talk about leakage, but there's some other bits about there as well with leakage. Leakage is one of the areas where we're seeing the most collaboration within the water industry, and it's something I've been particularly involved with. And that's kind of being used as a model for collaboration that hopefully the rest of the industry will be using as well. So that kind of frames why I want to talk about leakage, but its context with net zero. So why is it important with leakage reduction? This comes from the National Infrastructure Assessment. They've done this recently. In fact, this is now incorrect. It says 4,000 megalitres. A recent reassessment of that says 4,800. Now, that is the shortfall in supply demand in the UK, okay, by 2050. That's how much water we've got to find, okay? 4,800 megalitres is the combined distribution daily input of Severn Trent, Anglian and Thames all put together. And somehow we've got to find that water. Now, about a third of that's going to come from new supply and transfer infrastructure. Okay, so reservoirs and moving water from areas where you've got it. About a third of it is going to come at the bottom there from reduced demand measures. So smart metering, everybody, including, you know, myself, you, all of us just using less water, but a third will come from halving leakage. And that's a massive, great big drive at the moment is how do we halve that leakage? And as I said, that's going to have a huge impact on our ability to hit net zero as well. Next slide. So how we manage leakage is we break it down into 4 areas. We did this because a bit sick and tired of people going, oh, leakage is easy to solve and that there's a silver bullet. It's not. If you want to solve leakage, you've got to do all 4 of these brilliantly. Prevent it, stop the leaks happening in the first place. Then if they do happen, you've got to be aware of them. Typically, we do that by dividing our areas up into districts and monitoring those very closely. You've got to be able to locate it. Where do you actually dig it? These are all pipes buried a metre below the surface, and finding the leak is actually quite hard to do. And then you've got to be able to mend it quickly as well. And that's a complication in itself. We're trying to juggle all of the various councils and requirements and things like that to get in there and do the mend side. Next slide. So what have we been doing about that is joining up our thinking. So rather than operating as little islands, as separate water companies, there's a huge piece on collaboration. We jointly fund research together, but we also will run our own projects as well, little projects that we're doing to try and affect leakage in our areas. So rather than just keep that research to ourselves, what we're now starting to do is share that together. We put that into something called a leakage innovation heat map. That's now been published, and I'll show you some of the data that comes in from that. But what I'm going to do is put the link in the chat as well, so you can download it and have a play around yourself. Okay, it shows not just the company projects, but anything that's going on in the leakage area. So the UCWER projects, UK Water Industry Research Body, I'm the program lead on leakage for that. That's kind of why I do what I do, but also Spring, which is the innovation, showcasing and everything else like that. So loads and loads of stuff coming through, and collaboration is driving that. Let me just go next slide. So this is the kind of data that is available on that spreadsheet. For each company, what they've done is they have actually provided, here's my own projects, 417 at all, with details on there about what they're working on. What it allows us to do is break it down into the various areas. So it's not just the data on who's doing what. It allows us to start to map out where the hot spots and where the gaps are. So next slide. This will show, broken down by Palm, how many projects there are in the various areas, and we score those projects. We base it upon the size of the project, that's simply a financial one, the completeness of the project, whether it's just right at the beginning or whether it's been fully completed, and also whether the company is willing to share Okay, and that can range from we'll tell you we're doing it to actually we'll share all of our data as well, so people don't have to duplicate that research. And straight away, once we started doing this, we could see that most of our innovation work was occurring in awareness and location. Okay, so going out and looking for the leaks. There was some innovation going on in the prevent side, and actually very little going on in the mend. And one of the things I've been doing nationally is trying to make sure that we rebalance that. And so we're trying to get a lot more innovation into our prevention side, into our mains laying, in pressure management and calming, and a lot more innovation going into the mend side as well. And that's where we're starting to push innovation coming through. Next slide. And where that's driving us is this, as I said, the need for renewal and mend technologies. Our regulator has actually said, right, okay, this PALM methodology that you've come up with is so useful that we're going to ask you to report all your costs under that basis. So our PR24 plans that we've all just put in, all of those are based out on PALM as well. And that allows us to see that, as you can see, 52% of our spend is actually in repairing the pipe, and about 20% is in that prevention side. And as I said, this is where we're really starting to push it, because 70% of that innovation is actually in the two categories which have the least spend. We've got to really start driving it. And you can see at the top right there, the annual reduction in leakage that we've got to hit as companies to drive down towards that halving leakage by 2050. It's a challenging program, and no company will be able to do it with just the technologies they have at the moment. So we've got to bring in innovation into this area. Next slide. And kind of finally, one of the bits I've been looking at is actually the need for renewal. And I've been looking at the company's renewal plans. The slide is actually incorrect at the very bottom there. I suddenly realized after putting this through, it's actually 4.3 is the renewal percentage. So currently companies are proposing, and these are the proposed AMP plans, not the finalized ones. These are the proposed AMP plans of how much renewal they're going to do. We can see that they're talking about 7,500 kilometers of renewal happening in the next 5-year period, in the next AMP. That's equivalent of laying a pipe from here to China. Okay, we need to do that in such a way that also we think about our net zero commitments as well. Burying pipe and putting pipe in the ground is a very, very expensive, but also high carbon cost process. I recently saw a quotation for a main being laid in London, in central London, Mile End Road, and they were doing less than a mile of pipe, and the budget cost for that was 20 million. Because of all of the disruption and everything else that goes around it. So there's an absolute onus upon us as water companies to look at how we can do this at a reduced cost, but also how we can ensure that we're driving down the carbon costs of replacing our pipe as well. So what you will be seeing, hopefully, is quite a large renewal program coming through from the water companies, but some great innovations that we're going to be looking at in order to drive down the carbon costs and the cost to our customers for actually replacing that pipe. There we go. I think that's probably me.
Thank you, Jeremy. Great perspective there. Now we are going to move on to Simon. Simon Jones is the Sustainability Manager here at Radius Systems. And Simon is addressing a sustainable alternative, i.e. bioethylene pipes. He's going to talk about the chemical makeup and the possible viability of it as well. Over to you, Simon.
Thanks very much, Dion. Yeah, as you're probably aware, Radius Systems manufacture a range of polyethylene pipes for the safe and efficient distribution of water, natural gas, hydrogen, and other fluids at high pressure, and a range of complementary fittings. So, as Dion says, I'm going to talk about an alternative to traditional fossil-based polyethylene pipes and explain how this is fundamental to our route to net zero, being a net zero company by 2050, and in doing so, to touch on Jeremy's point as he finished off, help to support our customers in their route to net zero too. So how do we become net zero? Well, we estimate that over 96% of our greenhouse gas inventory, our carbon footprint, is due to the scope 3 emissions, which are goods and services, and that calculation includes an allowance for the installation of the pipe in the ground and its service life, which we expect to be significantly in excess of 100 years. So of this 96% of our carbon footprint, about 75% is due to the polyethylene resin we purchase, resin being the word we use to describe the polythene in its raw form as it comes into the factory. And if 10% of that resin was of a biological and not of a geological origin, the carbon intensity of our products would drop by about 7 and a bit %. So let's just take a step back a bit. What is polyethylene? We used to call it polythene. One definition, it's a tough, light, flexible synthetic resin made by polymerizing ethylene gas, excuse me, chiefly used for plastic bags, food containers and other packaging, and of course pipes. And there's a little graphic there to explain the process. Important features on the graphic are the bottom left-hand corner, where you have the source of ethylene gas, and the bottom right-hand corner, where you have the end product for that process, which is the dried polyethylene. Next slide, please, Dion. Thank you. So, does it matter where the ethylene gas comes from? Well, no, it doesn't. At least, it doesn't matter in relation to its mechanical properties and its other intrinsic properties. Historically, all ethylene gas used to make polyethylene was derived from a geological material, from crude oil. But ethylene can be derived from other biological materials, and the carbon in the ethylene is derived from the carbon captured from the atmosphere by photosynthesis from the plants that are used as the biomass. So the biomass is fermented anaerobically to produce bioethanol. That's dehydrated to bioethylene, and then it gets squirted into the process as per the graphic on the previous slide. Now, it being material that's grown, there has to be robust due diligence applied to this process to make sure that by growing the material, you're not contributing, or we're not contributing to food insecurity and or water stress. So does it matter where the ethylene gas comes from? Ethically, absolutely. It does matter where the ethylene comes from. So food for thought, pardon the pun. Is this a pipe dream? Well, as the slide states there, INEOS announced earlier this year that they'd produced some biologically based high-density polyethylene and used it to make the world's first fully sustainable gas pipeline for a French utility company, and with the intention of installing that in the ground. I haven't been able to determine whether they've achieved that. I imagine that they have. And it's estimated that globally, already about 16% of all polyethylene is of biological origin. Next slide, please, Dion. So a quick note about availability. You know, is this a fantasy or is this a reality? Source segregated, 100% plant-based, biologically originated polyethylene is available in some markets, but it's currently very much a premium product used in, not used in construction products, used in fashion and other high-value products. Whereas mass-balanced plant-based biological polyethylene is an option within the European market and elsewhere. We'll come on to talk a bit more about that in a minute, maybe. So what are the costs and benefits? Well, in local markets where source segregated plant-based polyethylene is available, it costs about twice what traditional geologically sourced polyethylene costs. Closer to home, ISCC plus mass balance certified polyethylene is available, but at roughly twice what traditional polyethylene costs. However, having acknowledged that it's expensive, a traditional polyethylene of a geological origin has an embedded carbon value of about 1.9 tons of CO2 per ton of resin. Whereas, for example, the Brazilian manufacturer Braskem's plant-based polyethylene has a net CO2 intensity, if you like, of more than minus 2 tons of CO2 per ton of resin. So the difference is an improvement in the embedded carbon of anything that containing that material of 4 tons of CO2 per ton of resin. Quite significant. So, in conclusion, plant-based, bio-based polyethylene can be considered to be a constructive, that is, a useful form of carbon capture and storage. And it's an important part of our route to net zero, and it could be an important part of yours. Biologically based polyethylene might be double the cost of fossil-based polyethylene, but does it, in fact, cost the Earth? Thanks very much for listening. Thank you for your time. Over to you, Dion.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks very much. Really interesting chemistry and questions about actually whether the Earth can handle that amount of biopipe against the food supplies and water stress. So that rounds us up for our panelists or speakers. This is the point where you as attendees can now post your questions. Do pop them into the chat box. As somebody's highlighted, these slides will be available to have a look at. The content is available to watch on demand as well. So if you're not already watching this on demand now, you're watching it live, you can watch it back again and go through the details. We'll be sending more details and emails to back all of this up, more information from each of the panelists in there as well. So let's get to the Q&A session now. I've got one question here. This one is for Horace. Why are iron mains reducing carbon? Just, I think you touched upon it, but it wasn't. You didn't explain exactly in what way.
So some of the iron mains that we use to move gas around the country are incredibly old, and partly because of the properties of the material and partly because of their age, then they are significantly more prone to leakage than new plastic pipe. So in the early 2000s, the decision was made that the gas networks should replace as much of that pipe as possible that's within, I think, something like 30 meters of a property. And so since that time, we've been going through the process of replacing all of that older, less safe iron with much safer and much less leaky plastic. And that process will run for the next 8 years.
Great, thank you for that. I know if Simon's just dropped a question in there about, does Radius have a target timescale for producing bioethylene pipe? The answer is, this is very much in the concept at the moment. So we're exploring the viability and the science of this. And if there's any partners that want to work with us on this, we very much seize the opportunity for that. Other questions now. Jeremy, question for you. Does new water infrastructure just need funding? Or is it more complicated than that?
Oh, it's way more complicated than that. And I will own up here is that I have Grace, our sustainability manager, kind of feeding me lines at the same time, and she's provided a text there. But let me just explain. So effectively, we have to, as water companies, justify all of our spend. We go through a regulatory review, which is currently going through with our regulator Ofwat at the moment. And to do that, we have to basically submit our projects and say, this is what we'd like to do, spend our funding upon. Now, part of that will be looking at our supply-demand balance and going, these are the projects that we would need to have in there, either, as I said, transfers or reservoirs, be looking at metering and looking at leakage reduction. These are where we'd like to spend our money going forward, okay? But even within that, we then have to look at these projects and not just consider them cost-wise. That used to be the way that it was done. It was simply looked at as how much is it going to cost and what's the benefit to our customers. We are now using far more complicated methods of evaluating these projects so that we look at the kind of capitals approach where you're looking at certainly the cost, of course, but you're looking at the environmental, you're looking at carbon, you're looking at all the other aspects of that project and take those into account and then say, okay, what's the benefit? How's the cost benefit stack up in terms of us building reservoirs, laying pipe, driving down leakage? So I know within leakage that the cost benefit of me sending somebody out there to find leaks, it's a lot more beneficial to do it that way than actually having to build reservoirs. And so therefore you always try and drive that down first and do those more cost effective and more environmentally effective methodologies first before you start to do something hugely intensive like building reservoirs.
Thanks, Jeremy. A question now. I'm going to put this one to Phil. Phil asks, we've got a question from George. He says, if it's appropriate, what's the thoughts on wind energy? So he lives by the sea and he doesn't see any sea turbines, and he's on the south coast east of Eastbourne. Given that you work within a wider landscape, I figured that this would be one for you to address.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I suppose the concepts of wind, absolutely is part of the renewables feeding into the grid. I suppose the complexities come in terms of the planning and applications. Again, sort of not pushing too much on sort of government backlash, but I think has been some backlash over the years in terms of adoption of wind, and even some sites in terms of solar as well. In terms of the application process, I believe the view is now that some of that has been lifted. I can send some further details if needs be after the call, but yeah, very much so that it will likely come down to the planning and effectively the developers as well. So Sustainable Energy First, we're working with a number of sort of trying to tie the two between, so sort of the off-taker, as it were, through sort of corporate power purchase agreement arrangements, and looking at developers as well. So if it's not a sort of government incentivized project, so like the Crown Estate, for example, has got a large arrangement in terms of wind. If it's a private development, it will likely come down to the arrangements in terms of the cost and obviously the longevity in terms of the project itself. But yeah, I'm happy to send some more details if there was some specifics on that. I think it was, is that the question, Dion, or was it more specific in terms of, is there projects in that area?
It was, I think it was a general question.
Yes, it was. Yeah, just to really see
George.
whether or not you guys are on it. And by the sounds of it, you are. So it's all good.
Make sure, if you need any more, send some stuff through.
I shall. I remember the green parties, so this is very much my thing.
George, you had another interesting question. As you're there, why don't you ask that? The one about the water and the higher bills.
Yes. So I mean, obviously, if we're going to be getting water in a more environmentally friendly way, I mean, I get the fact that it's probably going to result in short-term increases in bills, but is that likely to extend into the medium and long term, or is it going to mean that we're going to save money going forward? I know certainly with renewables, there's a big upfront payment, but then after that, you end up saving money long term.
Really good question, George. So the first bit I'm going to say is the jury's still out. And if this was 2 weeks' time, I'd probably, or 2 to 3 weeks' time, I'd be able to give you a better answer, because at the moment we are waiting for the government to, or effectively our regulator, to come back with their response to our plan. So they'll give us what's called a draft determination and say, this is what we think about the plan that you put in for the next 5 years. So we are looking at that at the moment, and that would tell us whether bills go up at all or not. One of the issues that we get is actually customers' views, because we have to take that into account. Effectively, what we have is customers' money that we receive in order to manage the water. So we have to bring in customers' viewpoints into what we're doing. And customers, certainly our customers in our area, when we surveyed them, they've got very polarized views on the importance of net zero. You know, we found that about a quarter, 27%, said, yeah, we want a more ambitious program, okay? And we're willing to put some money into that and things like that. But actually, over half, 51%, said, yeah, you've got to hit net zero by 2050, but we don't want to pay any more money for it. Now, that's one of the dichotomies is yeah, you know, we're quite happy for you to drive down these targets, don't really want to put our hands in our pockets, so we want the bills to stay the same. We have to make those arguments with our regulator and then also with our customers as well, and make sure that we bring them along with us and say, how do we actually respond to that and make sure that we're driving down net zero effectively and bringing our customers on, even though they may not see for themselves the benefits of that. And part of that, I have to say, as an innovation manager, is going to be innovation. We have to look at better ways of doing things and better solutions for doing things. These solutions that we're bringing in. One of the things that I've done is I've done some scanning across the industry and saying, where are the biggest needs for innovation? And one of the top areas across the water industry where they said, this is where we really need innovation, is net zero, and how we deliver that. So my expectation, George, is that we will be under pressure to keep bill rises down to a minimum, but under considerable pressure to use innovation and to use new solutions and techniques to actually drive down our carbon.
Thank you, Jeremy. I've got a question now from Raymond to Horace. Horace, how do you measure the methane emission of CI main leakage and replacement?
Yeah, so very happy to take that. So I may have misread the question, and I think I've probably only got about half the answer that I suspect Raymond's after. So I'll just tell you what I've got. So in terms of how we how we calculate and report leakage at the moment, so there's the wider category of shrinkage, which includes all the gas that's if you like sort of consumed or leaked from our network, and the reporting of that shrinkage is part of a regulatory process that we follow each year. And there's a regulated model then that's updated with network engineering data, pipe lengths, leakage rate assumptions, system pressures, and that all then facilitates a calculation of the leakage and shrinkage across the year. Reading the question again, I get the feeling that your question may well be more about how do we measure the benefit, and in terms of the benefit of plastic versus what it's replacing, I would have to take your question to one of my engineering colleagues, which I'm very happy to do, but in terms of that more technical point, I just don't have that at the moment, but very happy to take that away.
Thank you, Horace. Okay, so I think, Jeremy, I've just got another question for you now. You had, when we'd kind of had a chat in the run up to this webinar, you talked about what you think different players should be doing in the industry. I know we've got some contractors on this webinar today. What do you think they should specifically be doing? You know, we're talking about, yes, the utility companies, but what can they, how can they make a difference?
Yeah, they completely agree with that. Relationship with the contractors is absolutely vital. And part of that is how do we actually come up with contracts that incentivize the right behaviors? So let me give you an example. One of the areas that I've talked about is repair, is mending the pipes. As I said, we know that about 52% of our spend is in that area. Only about 13% of innovation is. One of the things we're seeing is solutions coming through, like, for instance, no dig. Okay, so this came out from actually the Northumbrian Innovation Festival. Effectively, it's a solution that can go down the pipe and it can seal, okay, from the inside of a pipe. It's very new. A number of companies are trialing this out, and we're kind of developing our understanding on how well this works, how long it will last for. Fantastic, you say. What a brilliant solution. Okay, let's talk about it from a contractor's point of view. So a contractor wins the contract for SES Water or some large water company, and they say, okay, I'm going to be carrying out repair and maintenance. And the first thing they do is they're going to get a load of JCBs, and they want those JCBs out of the yard and actually working. The issue then comes is we go, there's this great innovation that requires you don't have to dig up the road. Well, they're going to go, well, no, actually, I've kind of done my contract on that basis. So what this means is we have to really start thinking about the contracts and that relationship with the contractor, so it's a win-win situation, so that the contract actually incentivizes the contractors to use these new technologies and solutions as they come through, and it works to their benefit as well. Same goes with mains laying as well, and everything that comes along with that. So with mains laying, we're looking at, can we actually use the existing pipe more? Okay, so starting to sleeve and using techniques of going down the inside of pipes, what's called slip lining, pipe bursting, and all of these techniques. We struggle with that a bit in the water industry because the 3-hour interruptions to supply, we're not allowed to turn off water for more than 3 hours, really causes us difficulty there. But we are seeing solutions coming through in that area. And again, our mains laying contractor needs to be incentivized how we're writing those contracts in order to make sure that actually they get the benefit of using these new techniques as well. It's an area I'm doing quite a bit of work on at the moment, is looking at these contract managements. And if there's people want to discuss that with me, I'll be really pleased to meet up afterwards and say, okay, how do we come up with contracts that work for the contractor, but incentivize them to use new technologies as they come through?
Great. Thank you for answering that quite thoroughly. That was very helpful. Now, I don't think we've got any more questions, but correct me if I'm wrong, anyone. Speak now. This is your opportunity. Well, if you're watching on demand, it's not your opportunity in this chat. You need to go into the LinkedIn chat and comment there, and then we'll tag the speakers and they'll be able to get back to you. As we wrap up, I'd just like to remind you of our other webinars coming up later in the year in October. Now, I remember, Horace, you were talking about skills at Cadent Gas. This is something that we're addressing in our 2 webinars. One aspect of skills is the issue that contractors have in terms of apprentices of people and working, actually doing the work on the ground. It used to be a 2-3 year apprentice program. It's now down to about 12 weeks. But that means that people haven't been able to build that on the job experience. So it's really looking at the role of effective mentorship and why we need to be doing that. Then on the other hand, we know that in the industry, we've got another webinar about skills shortage and gender inclusivity, and kind of putting those two together, because we know there's a skills shortage. We know there's a gender inclusivity challenge, i.e. retention and attraction of females into the sector. So we're kind of matching those together and going, actually, if we improve that gender inclusivity perspective, we would automatically increase the pool of individuals that we could then draw from to address our skills gap. So join us on that. That's the next one coming up. That's on the 2nd of October. And then we've got the following one on the mentorship. That one's on the 18th of October. You can register for those now. Check out the synopsis abstracts online and the speakers, and make sure you join us then. That is it for us today. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, your time, and everybody who's joined us today and asked the questions. It's been a great session. Please do share the on-demand copy with your colleagues and let us know your feedback afterwards. Did it work for you? Has it not worked? Has it answered your questions? Please let us know, because we'll be doing more of these and we want to address your topics.
Can I quickly interject, which I know is a bit rude. I'll be brief. Yes, so apologies about that. I got cut off. My phone battery died. Not enough renewable energy about, that's what I say. Yeah, no, I very much look forward to the October events. I'm actually studying for CFA, environmentally friendly, governmentally responsible, and socially responsible qualification. I am white and male, so I'm probably not exactly the demographic you're looking for, but
actually, no, you're absolutely right. You are the demographic. Everybody needs to be aware of all these topics.
Yeah, no, I
so
absolutely
you're absolutely
agree.
right.
And it's just something that I just see it as the way forwards. And it's like, well, I mean, I'm 42, which is not particularly old, and I want my future to be quite nice. I also quite like the idea of my children's future to be quite nice as well. And being green is the way to go. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Appreciate it. Thanks, George. Anyone else can dive in there. This is an open forum. We're not holding back today. If anybody wants to unmute, share the camera, have a comment, feel free.
You don't want to see me.
Oh, come on, Matt. No. Okay, fair enough. Well, I think we can wrap it up today. Thank you so much for everybody for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you next time, and have a great rest of your day. Hope you don't melt in the heat, and look out for our emails with more information coming soon. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
And don't forget to give us your feedback. We really appreciate feedback, good or bad.